What if Ciel Phantomhive was chosen by death? Part 1: The Boy Who Refused to Die. The night the Phantomhive estate burned, the world did not end with screams. It ended with certainty. Flames devoured everything: walls, memories, names. Smoke choked the sky as rain began to fall, too late to matter. The grand halls that once held laughter collapsed into ash, and the name Phantomhive was swallowed by fire. In the middle of it all stood a boy. Ciel Phantomhive. Barefoot. Bleeding. Silent. His small body trembled, but not from fear. That had already passed. What remained was something colder. Something heavier. Understanding. His parents were gone. Not missing. Not lost. Gone. And as the fire crackled behind him, Ciel didn't cry. Because something inside him had already broken beyond tears. Then. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Wrong. Ciel turned. Through the smoke and rain, a figure approached. Dressed in black. Untouched by ash. Unmoved by the storm. Silver hair. Pale skin. Eyes that didn't belong to the living. And in his hand. A weapon. Not quite a scythe. Not quite anything human. It hummed faintly, glowing with a sick green light. Ciel stared. "Who are you?" The man stopped a few feet away. "I am here," he said calmly, "because you are supposed to be dead." No hesitation. No comfort. Just truth. Ciel's fingers curled slightly. "Then why am I still here?" The man studied him. Not like a person. Like a record. Because something has gone wrong. He raised his weapon. The air split open. Before Ciel, images began to play. His life. His mother smiling softly. His father correcting his stance with quiet pride. Tea in the gardens. Laughter. Warmth. Then. Fire. Chains. Screams. Hands dragging him away. Darkness. Ciel's breath caught. Stop. The vision vanished instantly. Silence returned. That, the man said, was your life as it was meant to be recorded. Ciel's voice dropped. Was. You were meant to die tonight. The words didn't shock him. They confirmed something he already felt. That makes sense, Ciel said quietly. The man tilted his head slightly. You accept that easily? Ciel's eye hardened. People like me don't get happy endings. For a moment, the Reaper said nothing. Then. Most beg. I won't. Most cry. I didn't. Most ask for more time. Ciel met his gaze. I don't want more time. A pause. Then. What do you want? The question hung in the burning air. Ciel didn't answer immediately. Because now. Now the truth came. Not polite. Not noble. Not human. I want them to suffer. The fire crackled louder. Rain struck the ground harder. The world itself seemed to listen. Ciel's voice stayed steady. I want the people who did this to lose everything. I want them to feel what I felt. His fingers trembled slightly. I want them to regret it. Silence. Then. The Reaper stepped closer. And for the first time. Something like interest appeared in his eyes. You are not asking for life, he said. No. You are asking for purpose. Yes. Good. The weapon in his hand struck the ground. The world shattered. Symbols of green light spread beneath Ciel's feet, spiraling outward in impossible patterns. The air filled with the sound of pages turning, thousands, millions, like reality itself was being rewritten. Ciel staggered slightly. What is this? I will not return your life, the Reaper said. The light intensified. But I will give you something else. The symbols rose. Wrapped around him. Tightened. You will become something that stands between life and death. Ciel's breathing quickened. You will see every truth hidden in human souls. The ground disappeared beneath him. You will walk among the living, but never belong to them again. The world faded. And one day, the Reaper's voice lowered. You may find the answers you seek. Ciel's eye burned. What do I become? The answer came like a verdict. A grim Reaper. For a moment. Nothing. Then. Ciel laughed. Soft. Broken. That's fitting. He lifted his head. The fire reflected in his eye. Fine. The light tightened. I accept. Pain. Not physical. Worse. Something reached into him, past flesh, past thought, and gripped his soul. Ciel screamed. But no sound came out. His heartbeat stopped. Then restarted. Slower. Colder. Different. When he opened his eyes, the world was gone. He stood in a vast hall. Endless. Dark. Lit only by green flames. Shelves stretched beyond sight, filled with records of lives long ended. Reapers moved in silence, their footsteps echoing with cold precision. Papers floated. Machines clicked. Chains dragged faintly somewhere in the distance. Ciel didn't move. This is death. No, the Reaper said behind him. This is order. Ciel turned slowly. Everything felt different. Sharper. Clearer. Empty. He looked down at himself. Black uniform. Gloves. No ash. No blood. No past. And now? Now, the Reaper said, you begin again. They walked through the halls. Reapers watched. Whispered. A child? Impossible. Special case. Ciel ignored them. But he noticed something. They weren't just confused. They were uneasy. They entered a chamber. 3 Reapers sat behind a black stone desk. Judges. Their presence alone pressed against Ciel's mind. This is the candidate, one asked. Yes, his instructor replied. He should be dead. He was. Then why is he here? A pause. Then. Because he refused to be nothing. Silence. The judges looked at Ciel. Not with curiosity. With calculation. Do you understand what you've accepted? One asked. Ciel didn't hesitate. Yes. You will lose your humanity. I already did. You will serve death. I'll use it. A flicker of reaction. Small. But real. Very well. A seal struck. The sound echoed like a coffin closing. It is done. Something burned briefly against Ciel's glove. A mark. A contract. Not with a demon. With death itself. Back in the halls. Training began immediately. No rest. No comfort. No adjustment period. Ciel adapted. Fast. Too fast. He learned the rules. Memorized them. Understood them. And quietly. Questioned them. He learned about souls. About records. About balance. About how death was not chaos, but control. Other trainees struggled. Hesitated. Reacted. Ciel didn't. When shown death, he watched. When shown suffering, he observed. When tested, he passed. Days passed. Or something like days. Time didn't matter anymore. Then. Weapons. The hall was massive. Filled with dormant scythes. Each one different. Each one dangerous. Choose, an instructor said. Ciel stepped forward. Looked. Analyzed. Waited. Then. One moved. A scythe rose. Elegant. Sharp. Alive with green light. It hovered before him. Waiting. Ciel reached out. The moment he touched it, power erupted. A shockwave blasted through the hall. Reapers stumbled back. Glass cracked. The air screamed. Ciel didn't move. The weapon adjusted. Aligned. Accepted him. Silence fell. That's not standard, someone whispered. No, his instructor said calmly. It's not. Ciel examined the weapon. What is it? A tool, the instructor said. And? One that will suit you. Ciel tightened his grip. It felt right. Too right. He lifted his head. When do I start real work? The room went still. The instructor studied him. Then. Soon. And in that moment. Something shifted. Not in Ciel. In everything around him. Because the boy who should have died that night was gone. In his place stood something else. Something quieter. Colder. More precise. And somewhere deep within the halls of death, a thought began to spread. Slow. Uneasy. Unspoken. This one is different. What if Ciel Phantomhive was chosen by death? Part 2, The First Judgment. The bell rang once. Everything stopped. Not slowed. Not quieted. Stopped. Quills froze midair. Papers hung suspended as if gravity had been dismissed. Even the faint mechanical ticking that echoed through the halls of the dispatch died instantly. Ciel did not react. He had already learned. When the bell rang, something important followed. Probationary Reaper Ciel Phantomhive. The voice echoed through the chamber. Report immediately. The stillness broke. Reapers resumed movement, but something had changed. Their glances lingered longer than before. Their whispers were quieter, but sharper. He's being sent out already. That's too early. He hasn't even completed full. Ciel ignored them. He stepped forward. Without hesitation. His instructor was waiting. As always. Unmoving. Watching. Your first assignment, the instructor said. No build-up. No explanation. Just fact. Ciel adjusted his grip on his scythe. Finally. They moved through the halls in silence. But this time, Ciel noticed more. The way Reaper stepped aside slightly as he passed. The way conversations ended when he drew near. The way eyes followed him. Not with curiosity anymore. With caution. Why are they watching me? Ciel asked. They are observing a variable, his instructor replied. A threat? A possibility. They stopped before a mirror. Or what looked like one. Its surface rippled faintly, like black water disturbed by something unseen. Images flickered across it. Moments. Deaths. Fragments of lives about to end. This is your entry point, the instructor said. Ciel stepped closer. The surface shifted. And for a split second, he saw himself. Not as a child. Not as a victim. But as something else. Something colder. Good, he muttered. The instructor placed a hand against the surface. The mirror split open. Go. Ciel stepped through. Cold air hit him instantly. London. Night. Rain falling in thin, endless lines. Gas lamps flickering against the dark. He stood still. Listening. Feeling. Nothing. You are no longer part of this world, the instructor said behind him. Don't forget that. Ciel looked down. Rain passed through his glove. Through his coat. Through him. Understood. They walked. Unseen. Untouched. People moved around them. Laughing. Talking. Living. Ciel watched closely. Not with longing. Not with nostalgia. With analysis. They don't know, he said quietly. No. They never will. No. Ciel's expression didn't change. Good. They stopped outside a narrow building. Worn. Quiet. Unimportant. This is the location, the instructor said. Ciel looked up at it. Something in his chest shifted. Not emotion. Recognition. Someone inside is about to die. Yes. Ciel stepped forward. The room was dim. A single candle flickered weakly. The air smelled of sickness. A man lay in bed. Pale. Breathing uneven. Each breath weaker than the last. Beside him. A woman. Holding his hand. Trembling. Please, she whispered. Stay with me. Ciel stood at the foot of the bed. Watching. Begin, the instructor said. Ciel moved. Slow. Precise. He raised his scythe. And paused. Not from fear. Not from hesitation. Something else. The man's face. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't desperate. It was calm. Ciel frowned slightly. Why? The man's eyes shifted. For a moment. They met Ciel's. Impossible. And yet. A faint smile appeared. Then. His heart stopped. The world froze. The candle flame stretched unnaturally long. The woman became still. Time. Paused. And from the man's chest. Light emerged. A thread. A soul. Ciel's grip tightened. This is the moment, his instructor said. Do not fail. Ciel moved. Faster. Sharper. His scythe cut through the air. Clean. Perfect. The blade connected with the soul. And everything changed. Memory. Not his. The man's. A childhood filled with laughter. Struggle. Loss. Love. Regret. Every moment. Compressed. Forced into Ciel's mind in an instant. He saw it all. Felt it all. Understood it all. Then. Silence. Ciel stood still. The scythe hummed softly in his hand. Before him. The soul stabilized. No longer chaotic. No longer bound. Waiting. Ciel stared at it. This was a life. Not power. Not status. Not revenge. Just a record. Pathetic, he said quietly. The instructor didn't respond. Ciel stepped forward. You weren't afraid. The soul flickered. And though it had no voice, Ciel understood. Acceptance. His expression hardened. Then go. He guided the soul forward. It dissolved into light. Gone. The world resumed. The woman gasped. No, no. She collapsed beside the body. Crying. Breaking. Ciel watched. Unmoving. Unchanged. That is death, his instructor said. Ciel didn't look at him. That's all it is? Yes. Ciel's grip tightened slightly. Then it's meaningless. A pause. Is that what you believe? The instructor asked. Ciel turned. His green eyes faintly glowing. If every life ends the same way, he said, then nothing they do matters. Silence. Then. Careful, the instructor said. That mindset leads to errors. Ciel didn't respond. They left the building. The rain had stopped. The city continued. Unchanged. Unaware. But something was different. Ciel stopped walking. We're being watched. His instructor didn't look up. I know. Ciel's eye narrowed slightly. Are you going to stop them? No. Why? A pause. Because they're watching you. Ciel's expression didn't change. Good. High above. On a rooftop hidden in shadow. A figure stood. A grim reaper. Watching. So it's true, they murmured. The child? Their gaze sharpened. He didn't hesitate. Below. Ciel stepped back toward the rift. Send me again, he said. The instructor glanced at him. You've just completed your first assignment. And I didn't fail. No. Ciel turned slightly. His voice calm. Cold. Certain. Then I don't need to stop. Silence. Then. For the first time. The instructor smiled. Slightly. No, he said. You don't. And as the rift opened. As the world bent once more. As death itself prepared to move again. The whispers began. Quiet. Spreading. The Phantomhive boy. He felt nothing. He didn't react. He didn't hesitate. And deeper. More dangerous. His learning too fast. On the rooftop. The watching reaper stepped back into shadow. If this continues. Their voice lowered. He won't just become strong. Their eyes darkened. He'll become something we can't control. Back in the endless halls of death. Ciel Phantomhive walked forward. His first soul taken. His first judgment passed. And already, without realizing it, he had begun to change something fundamental. Not just within himself, but within death itself. And that was what truly frightened them. What if Ciel Phantomhive was chosen by death? Part 3, The Reaper They Couldn't Ignore. The second bell rang 3 assignments later. By then, the whispers had changed. At first, they had been cautious. Quiet. Unwilling to take shape. Now, they had sharpened. The Phantomhive boy completed 4 collections without error. He reviews records too fast. He doesn't react like the others. A pause. Then, lower. No. Worse. He's improving. Ciel heard all of it. He never answered. Never slowed. Never cared. At least, that was what they believed. The truth was simpler. Ciel cared about one thing. Progress. Every mission completed meant more understanding. Every soul collected meant more knowledge of the rules, the patterns, the weak points in the machine that called itself order. The dispatch wanted obedience. Ciel wanted mastery. And mastery, he knew, was the first step toward control. The dispatch had already become predictable. Its bells. Its ledgers. Its cold green fire and endless corridors. Most Reapers had lived inside that system so long they no longer questioned it. They followed rules the way clock hands follow time. Perfectly. Thoughtlessly. Ciel watched them and understood something dangerous. They were efficient. But they were complacent. That was why he surpassed them. Not because he was older. Not because he was stronger. But because he still remembered what it meant to want something. He stood in the archive chamber, cinematic records spread across a long iron table. Green flame cast hard shadows over the files and sharpened the pale angles of his face. The first file was simple. A factory worker. Industrial accident. Standard retrieval. Ciel closed it. Another. A woman with a fever already too deep in her lungs. Closed. Another. A child marked for a carriage incident. Minor variance risk. Closed. You review too quickly. The voice came from behind him. Ciel did not look up. I've already memorized the relevant points. Senior Examiner Halbrecht stepped into the light. Tall. Severe. Sharp glasses. The expression of a man who believed authority should be accepted without being tested. Ciel had seen that expression before. It always looked offended by his existence. These are not classroom exercises, Halbrecht said. No, Ciel replied. They are simpler than that. The silence turned immediate and heavy. Across the room, two junior reapers suddenly found the shelves beside them fascinating. Halbrecht stepped closer. Talent has made you arrogant. Ciel lifted his gaze at last. His face remained calm. No, he said. Low standards make me impatient. One of the junior reapers nearly dropped a file. Halbrecht's expression did not change, which only made him seem more dangerous. You believe yourself exceptional. I believe results matter. And you believe you produce them. I know I do. Halbrecht studied him for a long moment. Then he placed a new file on the table. It landed hard. Intentional. Then prove it. Ciel looked down. The file bore a red seal. Restricted variance. Complex extraction. Multi-subject interference. He opened it and read. A church fire. Multiple casualties. One scheduled death hidden among several unstable endings. If he misread the records, he could sever the wrong soul, contaminate the others, and fail publicly. A trap. Not a difficult one. A deliberate one. You're assigning this to me? Ciel asked. Halbrecht folded his hands behind his back. Unless you would prefer to admit you are not ready. Ciel closed the file, picked up his scythe, and stood. When do I leave? Halbrecht had likely expected hesitation. He found none. Immediately. Ciel stepped past him, then paused at the doorway. Without turning, he said, if I complete it, your opinion becomes irrelevant. Then he left. By the time he reached the transit mirror, his instructor was already waiting. Of course he was. As if every meaningful movement in the dispatch eventually cast a shadow at his feet. You accepted the assignment, his instructor said. Yes. You recognized the intention behind it. Yes. And still agreed. Ciel adjusted his grip on the shaft of his scythe. Yes. Why? Because refusal would be remembered. Because success would matter. Because every test survived made the next one easier to use. But the answer he gave was simpler. Because disappointing them sounds useful. For the briefest second, the faintest trace of amusement crossed his instructor's face. Then it was gone. The extraction is unstable, he said. Do not rely on what appears most obvious. Confirm the correct record before you sever. I know. No. You understand the instruction. I am telling you to respect the risk. Ciel met his gaze. Are you warning me? I am stating facts. That sounds close to concern. It is not. Pity. The mirror opened. Green light rippled outward. The church waited. The heat hit him first. Then smoke. Then sound. The church was already half consumed. Fire raced up shattered beams and crawled over old wood like something alive. Stained glass had burst across the floor in pieces of blue, red, and gold. Somewhere ahead, someone screamed. This was not the quiet stillness of a deathbed. This was chaos. Ciel walked through it untouched. His eyes moved constantly. Counting. Measuring. Searching. A woman stumbled through the smoke with a child in her arms. Two men tried to force open a warped side door. A priest was pinned near the altar beneath a fallen beam. None of them were the target. Their records were bright with fear but not finality. Then Ciel saw him. A young man trapped beneath burning timber near the center pews, one hand reaching toward a woman sprawled on the floor a few feet away. His record was vibrating. Ready. Ciel moved toward him. A beam cracked above. Fell. Passed harmlessly through him. He did not slow. As he reached the dying man, the world around him blurred. That was the threshold. The point where life loosened and the soul began to separate. Ciel lowered his gaze. The cinematic thread surfaced. But so did others. 3 nearby records tangled at the edges, warped by fear, pain, and emotional proximity. Ciel narrowed his eye. There. The correct thread was not the brightest. It was the calmest. He raised his scythe. And stopped. Because the woman on the floor moved. Barely. But enough. Her hand found the dying man's fingers. His face changed. Peace. Not because he was unafraid. Because he had seen her alive one last time. Ciel should have severed then. The timing was correct. The record was ready. That was the rule. No delay. No indulgence. No interference. Then he noticed the woman's record flicker. Not final. Not yet. Alive. Barely. But above her, burning cloth had reached the beam that held the shattered drapery in place. If it collapsed now, she would die too. Not scheduled. Not recorded. Wrong. Ciel looked up once and understood the sequence immediately. If he acted now, his target died correctly. If he did nothing else, she likely died beside him. Messy. Unplanned. Wasteful. His scythe lowered half an inch. The rule was clear. Reapers did not intervene in the living. But Ciel did not pause from mercy. He paused because disorder offended him. He moved. A blur of black and green. He struck the descending metal stand beside the woman just hard enough to drag the burning cloth away from the beam. The fire line broke. The support held. Her record steadied. Still alive. Still not his. Then Ciel turned back and severed the soul cleanly. The world paused. Memory struck. Not grandeur. Not power. A baker's apprentice. Burned hands. Flour on his sleeves. Long mornings. Cheap laughter. A cramped room warmed by love rather than comfort. A promise to marry when there was enough money. Smoke. Fear. Pain. Then relief. Ciel guided the soul free without expression. But when the memories vanished, one thought remained. He had been ordinary. And still, his life had meant everything to someone. The soul dissolved into pale green light. Time resumed. The woman coughed. Lived. Then a voice came through the smoke. Probationary Reaper. Ciel turned. A senior field reaper stood in the broken entrance, face half-shadowed behind green lenses. You interfered. I corrected an instability. You acted on the living. I prevented an unscheduled sequence collapse. The older reaper stepped closer. That is not your judgment to make. It was, Ciel said, when no one else was here to make it. Silence sharpened between them. You realize I can report this? Yes. And yet you say it openly. Yes. Why? Ciel's expression did not change. Because if you intended to stop me, you would have done it before asking questions. The senior Reaper stared at him. Then the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not approval. Recognition. You are either reckless, he said, or far too intelligent for your rank. Those aren't mutually exclusive. By the time Ciel returned to the dispatch, the report had already spread. Not the official one. The real one. The kind carried through halls in lowered voices. He handled the church extraction. He altered the hazard line. He prevented contamination. No probationary Reaper should attempt that. And yet he did. Ciel walked through the center hall as the whispers split around him. Some looked openly. Others looked away too quickly. A few older Reapers watched with the kind of caution that stood only one step away from respect. Halbrecht was waiting in the review chamber. Your report, he said. Ciel handed it over. Halbrecht read in silence, then looked up. You documented the intervention. Yes. You could have omitted it. Yes. And you did not. No. Halbrecht closed the file with controlled care. You violated procedure. I preserved sequence integrity. There is always time to obey. No, Ciel said. There is only time to be correct. The room went cold. You presume much for a child, Halbrecht said. And you tolerate inefficiency because it's old, Ciel replied. Before Halbrecht could answer, another voice cut through the chamber. That will be enough. Ciel's instructor stood in the doorway, silver hair lit by green flame. This probationary Reaper admitted unauthorized interference, Halbrecht said. He documented a stabilized extraction under hazardous variance and prevented collateral corruption, the instructor replied. He broke protocol. He improved the result. That is not the standard. The instructor's gaze sharpened. Perhaps that is the problem. The silence afterward was deeper than anger. This was no longer about one mission. It was about something older. Rules versus results. Tradition versus adaptation. And somehow, Ciel had become the place where those things collided. Halbrecht turned back to him. You think this makes you special? Ciel answered immediately. No. It makes me useful. Then, after the smallest pause. And that's what frightens you. Halbrecht handed the file back. Not dismissed. Not approved. Pending. I will be watching you closely, Phantomhive. I assumed as much. Word spread faster after that. Not only among trainees. Among collectors. Examiners. Archivists. Field Reapers. Some spoke his name with irritation. Some with curiosity. Some with the uneasy silence reserved for things that might one day change the balance of a place. A week later, the challenge became public. The training hall was crowded. Sparring evaluations had drawn observers to the upper walkways, though most were there for one reason only. To see whether the Phantomhive boy would finally fail. Ciel stood in the center ring, scythe in hand. Across from him stood Lorenz, another probationary Reaper, older in appearance and broader in build. The kind of man who trusted strength because it required less thought. This isn't personal, Lorenz said. That usually means the opposite, Ciel replied. The signal bell rang. Lorenz attacked first. Fast. Aggressive. Predictable. He feinted high, shifted left, then came down in a rotating strike meant to force Ciel into defense. Ciel stepped aside half a second early. Not reacting. Reading. Lorenz's weapon cut through empty air. Ciel struck the shaft once. Then again at the wrist. Then at the center grip. Lorenz lost control instantly. His scythe clattered across the ring. The exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. Silence followed. Then Lorenz lunged barehanded, face burning with humiliation. A mistake. Ciel twisted, redirected the momentum, drove the butt of his scythe into Lorenz's stomach, and swept his legs from under him. Lorenz hit the floor hard. Ciel placed the blade at his throat and stopped. Perfectly still. "You're too emotional," he said. "It makes you slow." Then he stepped back. Finished. No one applauded. That was not how the dispatch worked. But the silence afterward was louder than sound. Because it was not just that Ciel had won. It was how easily he had done it. How little effort it seemed to require. How absolutely empty his face remained afterward. One senior reaper on the upper walkway said quietly, "He's not training like the others." Another answered, "No." A third said, after a pause, "He's hunting patterns." From that day on, fear stopped being rumor. It became posture. Distance. Changed tone. People lowered their voices when he passed. And one phrase began repeating through the halls. "Be careful around the Phantomhive boy." Late one cycle, alone in a records chamber, Ciel felt it again. That sensation. Being watched. He did not turn immediately. "Are you going to remain in the doorway?" he asked, or be irritating more directly. A woman stepped into the green light. Senior Field Reaper. Scar across one cheek. Composed. Unimpressed. Her badge read, "Miel. I wanted to see you for myself," she said. "That's a poor habit. I've heard stranger things about you. I'm sure." Her gaze dropped to his scythe. "Church extraction. South District. Yes. You made the right call." Ciel did not answer. She studied him for a moment longer. "They will keep testing you," she said. "Some because they mistrust you. Some because they are curious. Some because they want proof the stories are exaggerated. And you?" "I wanted to know whether they were. And they weren't." She turned, then stopped. One warning, Phantomhive. Ciel waited. "The day senior reapers become afraid of you," she said, "is the day your real trouble begins." Then she was gone. Ciel looked down at the next file waiting on the table. Another death. Another ending. Another task. But beneath all of it, deeper than the green fire, deeper than the rules, the old promise remained. He had not forgotten. Not the flames. Not the men who had destroyed his life. Not the reason he had accepted death's offer. He opened the file. Read the name. And froze. Only for a second. The target was a minor informant scheduled to die in London's East End. Ordinary on the surface. Except for one attached notation found during cross-reference. Prior association, Phantomhive estate incident. Ciel's fingers tightened around the page. At last. A thread. A connection. A path leading back. And in the green silence of the records chamber, Ciel Phantomhive smiled for the first time since becoming a Grim Reaper. It was not a kind smile. Not a human one. It was the smile of someone who had just found the first crack in a locked door. And knew exactly how patient he could be while breaking it open. What if Ciel Phantomhive was chosen by death? Part 4, The Thread That Shouldn't Exist. The name did not leave his mind. Not once. Not as he walked through the halls of the dispatch. Not as bells rang and assignments shifted. Not as records were filed, reviewed, and forgotten by everyone except him. Prior association, Phantomhive estate incident. Ciel stood alone in the records chamber. The green flame above flickered once. Twice. As if reacting to something unseen. Or something remembered. He read the file again. Slowly this time. Carefully. Not scanning. Not analyzing. Studying. The target was insignificant on the surface. A low-level informant. A man whose life held no visible weight. No power. No influence. No reason to matter. But the notation changed everything. "Where were you?" Ciel murmured. The words weren't a question. They were a statement waiting to be confirmed. For the first time since becoming a Reaper, Ciel was not reading a record as an assignment. He was reading it as a clue. And that changed the rules. "You're staring at that file longer than usual." Ciel didn't turn. "I found something interesting." His instructor stepped into the room. Silent as always. Observing. "Interesting is not a relevant classification," he said. Ciel's eye shifted slightly. "It is when the system misses something." A pause. "Explain." Ciel tapped the page once. Cross-reference notation. "It shouldn't exist here." His instructor stepped closer. "Look down. Read." And for the first time, his expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. "That incident," he said quietly. Ciel's voice remained steady. "Yes." Silence settled between them. Heavier than before. "You are not assigned to investigate this," his instructor said. "I am assigned to collect the target." "That is not the same thing." "No," Ciel replied. "But it can become the same thing." The instructor studied him. "Longer than usual. You are stepping outside your function." Ciel finally turned. His green eyes steady. Cold. Focused. "My function," he said, "is to ensure the correct end. And this is not your end." "No," Ciel said. "But it leads to it." The silence that followed was different. Not warning. Not correction. Recognition. "You will not be supported," his instructor said. "I don't need support. You may be stopped." Ciel's grip tightened slightly on the file. Then they should try. The bell rang. Assignment confirmed. London. Night. The East End was different from the rest of the city. Darker. Heavier. The air itself felt like it carried secrets that refused to surface. Ciel stepped through the mirror. Alone this time. No instructor. No observation. No guidance. That, more than anything, told him this mattered. The streets were narrow. Wet. Dimly lit by flickering lamps. Figures moved in shadows, quick and cautious, as if the city itself might turn on them if they stayed still too long. Ciel walked through it all. Untouched. Unseen. Until he stopped. There. A small building. Half abandoned. Windows dark. Door slightly open. Inside. The target waited. Ciel entered without hesitation. The air was thick. Not with smoke. Not with death. With something else. Memory. The man sat at a table. Hand shaking. Eyes darting. Waiting. He knew. Ciel could see it immediately. Not fear of death. Fear of being found. Interesting, Ciel said quietly. The man froze. Who's there? He couldn't see Ciel. But something. Some instinct. Told him he wasn't alone. Ciel stepped forward. The cinematic record began to surface. Not fully. Not cleanly. Fragmented. Ciel's eye narrowed. Why is it unstable? The man stood abruptly. Knocked over the chair behind him. No, I wasn't supposed to. The record surged. Not in sequence. Out of order. Broken. And then Ciel saw it. Fire. Chains. Screaming. A room. Burning. His breath didn't change. His expression didn't shift. But something inside him moved. So you were there. The man collapsed to his knees. I didn't have a choice. Ciel's voice cut through him. Sharp. Precise. You always had a choice. The record flickered violently. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how cinematic records behaved. They didn't resist. They didn't fracture. They didn't hide. Ciel stepped closer. What are you hiding? The man looked up. And for the first time, he saw him. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough. His eyes widened. No. Ciel raised his scythe. Your time is over. The blade moved. And stopped. Mid-air. Ciel's eye narrowed. Something was wrong. The record wasn't stabilizing. It was splitting. Two threads. One correct. One hidden. Ciel lowered the scythe slightly. You've been altered. The man shook his head violently. I didn't mean to. Someone changed your record. Silence. Then a voice. Not the man's. Not Ciel's. Something else. You're not supposed to see that. Ciel didn't turn. Then they should have hidden it better. The room shifted. The air distorted. And from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. A reaper. Not in standard uniform. Not recognized. Unknown. You're interfering with something beyond your clearance, the figure said. Ciel's grip tightened. You altered a human record. That's not your concern. It is when it connects to me. The figure paused. So you remember. Ciel's eye sharpened. More than you think. The figure moved slightly. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Measured. You should walk away. No. Then you'll be removed. Ciel raised his scythe. Try. The air tightened. The world seemed to hold its breath. And in that moment, everything changed. Because this was no longer an assignment. This was a breach. A fracture in the system. And Ciel Phantomhive had just found it. What if Ciel Phantomhive was chosen by death? Part 5, The System That Lies. The silence didn't last. It never did. The moment the unknown Reaper stepped forward, the system reacted. Not with alarms. Not with bells. With pressure. The air itself tightened. As if the world was correcting something that wasn't supposed to happen. Ciel didn't move. His scythe remained raised. His eyes locked onto the figure in front of him. You altered a human record, Ciel said. The unknown Reaper tilted his head slightly. And you noticed. That wasn't difficult. It should have been. Ciel's grip tightened. Then you made a mistake. A pause. Then a faint smile. No, the Reaper said quietly. You did. The world shifted. The cinematic record shattered. Not metaphorically. Not subtly. It broke. Fragments of memory scattered through the air like glass. Fire. Chains. Screaming. A room. Burning. Ciel's eye sharpened. You're hiding something inside the record. Of course I am. The Reaper stepped closer. Do you know what happens, he continued, when the system records something it doesn't understand? Ciel didn't answer. It rewrites it. The word settled. Heavy. Incorrect, Ciel said. The system preserves truth. The Reaper's smile widened. No, he said. It preserves order. Silence. And for the first time, Ciel hesitated. Not physically. Mentally. Because those two things were not the same. Behind them, the informant screamed. The sound snapped reality back into place. Ciel moved. Fast. The side cut clean. But stopped. Again. The thread split. 2 outcomes. 2 deaths. 1 real. 1 hidden. Ciel's voice lowered. You rewrote his fate. No, the Reaper replied. I corrected it. By breaking the system. By improving it. The air warped again. This time, Ciel reacted first. He vanished. Reappeared behind the Reaper. And struck. The blade cut through. Nothing. The figure blurred. Shifted. Reformed several feet away. Good, the Reaper said softly. You're faster than the others. Ciel's eyes narrowed. You're not standard. No. You're not assigned. No. Then what are you? The Reaper stepped forward again. And this time, the green light flickered. Wrong. Not the clean, controlled glow of the dispatch. Something deeper. Something unstable. And what happens, the Reaper said. When someone realizes the system isn't perfect. Ciel didn't respond. Because he understood. Too quickly. You're rewriting death, he said. Adjusting it. That's not your authority. It should be. The Reaper tilted his head slightly. You've already started doing it. Silence. No, Ciel said. I corrected a sequence. Yes, the Reaper replied. And you didn't ask permission. The words hit harder than they should have. Because they were true. The fire around them surged. The building began to collapse. The informant's record destabilized further. Time was running out. Step aside, Ciel said. No. Then I'll remove you. I'd like to see you try. Ciel moved. This time. Not testing. Not observing. Ending. The side cut through space itself. And connected. The Reaper blocked. Not with a weapon. With his hand. Green energy flared. The impact shook the room. Chains snapped from the ceiling. Flames surged outward. For a moment. Everything froze. Then. They separated. Ciel slid back 1 step. The Reaper didn't move at all. You're stronger than you should be, Ciel said. And you're asking questions you shouldn't, the Reaper replied. The informant screamed again. Louder this time. Desperate. Ciel looked back. Just for a second. And that was enough. The Reaper moved. Fast. Too fast. By the time Ciel turned, the figure was already at the informant. No. Ciel lunged. But he was too late. The Reaper touched the record. And everything went still. The thread vanished. Not cut. Not severed. Gone. The body collapsed. Empty. Wrong. Ciel froze. What did you do? The Reaper turned slowly. I removed him. That's not possible. It is now. Silence. Because Ciel knew. He wasn't lying. The system hadn't reacted. No correction. No backlash. Nothing. The dispatch didn't stop you, Ciel said. No. Why? The Reaper smiled. Because they can't see me. The word settled like ash. They removed themselves from the parts of the system they couldn't control, he continued. And I live in what's left. Ciel's grip tightened. You're hiding inside the system. No, the Reaper said softly. I'm fixing it. The building collapsed further. Flames surged toward the ceiling. Reality began to tear at the edges. Ciel didn't move. Didn't retreat. Didn't hesitate. You're connected to the Phantomhive incident. A pause. Yes. The answer came too easily. Too directly. What happened that night? Ciel asked. The Reaper's expression didn't change. You already know. No, Ciel said. I know what they recorded. Silence. Then. A shift. Subtle. But real. That's the problem, the Reaper said quietly. What they recorded isn't what happened. Everything stopped. Even the fire. Even the air. Explain, Ciel said. The Reaper looked at him. And for the first time, there was something else in his expression. Not confidence. Not control. Warning. If you keep digging, he said, they won't let you stay a Reaper. Ciel didn't look away. I didn't become one to stay. Silence. Then. A laugh. Quiet. Almost impressed. Good, the Reaper said. Then you might survive this. The world cracked. The fire collapsed inward. The space around them folded. And the Reaper disappeared. Gone. Ciel stood alone in the ruins. The informant's body lay motionless. Empty. Not processed. Not recorded. Not real. By the system's standards. And for the first time, Ciel understood something worse than death. The system could lie. When he returned to the dispatch, nothing had changed. The halls were quiet. The records were clean. The system. Perfect. No report. No anomaly. No trace of what had happened. The informant's file. Gone. Ciel stood in the records chamber. Silent. Still. So this is how it works. Behind him, the green flame flickered. And for the first time since becoming a Reaper, Ciel Phantomhive felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not hesitation. Interest. Because now, this wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. And the system was hiding it. What if Ciel Phantomhive was chosen by death? Part 6, the ending he chose. The system lied. That truth followed Ciel through every corridor of the dispatch like a second shadow. The halls had not changed. The green flame still burned with the same cold steadiness. Clerks still stamped reports. Reapers still crossed paths with clipped footsteps and lowered eyes. Files still moved from shelf to shelf as if nothing in all creation could ever truly slip out of place. But Ciel knew better now. He had seen a record altered. Seen a soul erased without collection. Seen a Reaper who existed somewhere inside the blind spots of the system itself. And worst of all, he had heard the words that no law, no bell, no official doctrine could silence once spoken. What they recorded isn't what happened. Since that night, he had not slept. Not properly. Reapers did not need rest as humans did, but still they entered periods of stillness, of mental quiet, of cold, detached recalibration. Ciel had found none of that. Every moment had been sharpened by one thought alone. The fire. The estate. His family. And whatever had truly happened in the dark before the records had been cleaned and filed away into acceptable lies. He stood again in the records chamber, both gloved hands braced against the iron table, staring at the empty space where the informant's file should have been. Gone. As if the man had never existed. As if Ciel had imagined the assignment, the confrontation, the impossible fracture in the order of death itself. But he had not imagined the feeling. Someone had reached into the machine and changed it. And now, for the first time since becoming a Grim Reaper, Ciel understood that revenge was no longer enough. If he was going to reach the truth, he would have to cut through the system that had hidden it. Behind him, the door opened. He did not turn. "You've been watched for 3 cycles," his instructor said. Ciel's expression did not change. "Only 3. That was not wit. It was a warning." Ciel straightened slowly and turned. "Then give the complete version." His instructor stepped fully into the chamber. Even now, silver-haired and unreadable, he seemed less like a man and more like a verdict that had not yet been delivered. "Halbrecht has filed a motion to restrict your access," he said. "You are being flagged as unstable, procedural risk, and advancement incompatible." Ciel almost smiled. "Advancement incompatible," he repeated. "That sounds insulting. It was meant to be terminal." That made him still. A silence passed between them. Then Ciel asked, "What are they afraid of?" His instructor did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was lower than usual. "They are afraid that you are asking questions in the correct order." Ciel's gaze sharpened. "Then I'm close." "Yes." The answer came too easily. Too directly. And because of that, Ciel understood at once that something had already moved beyond correction. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked. His instructor held his gaze. Then, for the first time since the night of the fire, he gave Ciel something he had never given him before. The truth without decoration. "There is a sealed archive beneath the dispatch," he said. "Records not erased, but removed. Cases deemed dangerous to official continuity. Impossible deaths. Manipulated sequences. Unauthorized alterations." His eyes hardened. "And the Phantomhive estate incident is among them." Ciel's breath did not change, but something inside him did. "A locked door. Finally found. Why tell me now?" "Because they intend to move you before dawn cycle." "Move me where?" "Isolation processing." That was not punishment. It was disappearance. Not death. Worse. He would remain in the system, but removed from consequence. Filed away. Neutralized. Forced into clerical eternity while the truth remained buried under laws written by cowards. Ciel picked up his scythe. "Then I don't have much time." "No," said his instructor. "You do not." The green flame above them flickered. Ciel glanced toward the chamber door, then back to the one person in the dispatch who had repeatedly stood at the edge of intervention without fully crossing it. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. For the first time, his instructor looked tired. Not physically. Anciently. "Because once," he said, "I believed the system was enough. Then I watched it preserve itself at the expense of truth." He paused. "And because you are what happens when an ending refuses to remain obedient." Ciel said nothing. That answer was enough. "Where is the archive?" he asked. His instructor stepped forward, placed a folded strip of black parchment onto the table, and slid it toward him. "Lower levels. Beneath adjudication. Past the record furnaces." His gaze sharpened. "You will not be alone down there. The unknown Reaper." "Yes." Ciel tucked the parchment into his coat. "And if Halbrecht reaches me first?" His instructor's eyes did not soften. "Then kill the hesitation before it kills you." The descent into the sealed levels was unlike anything in the visible dispatch. The further down Ciel went, the less the corridors resembled administration and the more they resembled confession. The walls narrowed. The green flames dimmed. The shells gave way to iron vault doors marked with old seals and older warnings. Some hummed faintly, as if the records contained within them were still trying to happen. Others were silent in the way graves were silent, not empty, only finished. Ciel moved quickly. No wasted motion. No uncertainty. He passed the record furnaces, where condemned files burned in white-green fire. Past abandoned adjudication chambers whose scales had rusted into stillness. Past doorways sealed with ribbons of law, ink, and blood-coded authority. At the end of the final corridor stood a single black door. No markings. No title. That made it more certain than any label could have. Ciel placed one hand against it. It opened inward. The archive beyond was circular, vast, and impossibly tall, its walls lined with suspended records turning slowly in midair like trapped moons. At the center of the chamber stood a long platform of black stone. And waiting upon it, Halbrecht. He was not alone. 3 senior reapers stood behind him, silent and armed. So, Halbrecht said, "You did come." Ciel stepped fully inside. "You expected me. I counted on your inability to leave rot untouched." Ciel's grip tightened on his scythe. "And yet you still stand in my way." Halbrecht adjusted his gloves. "You mistake this for a personal conflict. It is not. This is maintenance." Ciel's eyes narrowed. "You buried the estate records." "We preserved structural integrity." "You lied." "We prevented collapse." The words struck with more force than if Halbrecht had shouted them. Ciel took one step forward. "What happened that night?" Halbrecht's face remained maddeningly composed. A sequence occurred that should not have existed. If left intact, it would have implicated members of our own order. Unauthorized interference. Improper contact with the living. Experimental tampering. He looked directly at Ciel. The record was sealed. Corrected. Made survivable. Ciel went still. Members of their own order. Not merely humans. Not merely murderers in masks. Reapers. The fire had not only consumed his home. It had been touched by death's own corruption. "You let them live," Ciel said. "For a time. You erased it. We contained it." The rage that rose in him was colder than any he had known before. Not wild. Not blinding. Perfect. "You took my life," he said. "Then you took the truth of it." Halbrecht's reply came like a blade drawn slowly. "And we gave you another purpose in exchange." Ciel moved before the final word fully left his mouth. The first senior reaper lunged to intercept him. Too slow. Ciel's scythe flashed once, severing the weapon at its center grip and driving the broken shaft back into the reaper's chest. The second came from the left. Ciel pivoted, turned the strike aside, and cut through the attacker's shoulder line with ruthless precision. The third tried to hold distance, invoking law seals in green fire. Ciel crossed the space between them and struck the floor hard enough to shatter the forming glyph. The chamber shook. Records screamed overhead. Halbrecht finally drew his own weapon. A long, elegant death scythe with a blade like a judge's smile. "You were always too dangerous to keep," he said. "And you were always too cowardly to stop me sooner," Ciel answered. Then they collided. Halbrecht was faster than Lorenz, sharper than any probationary opponent, and more experienced than anyone Ciel had yet faced openly. His movements were disciplined to the point of cruelty. He did not waste energy. He did not overextend. Every strike was chosen to end the fight as efficiently as possible. But Ciel had something else. Not centuries. Not Polish. Need. Their sides crashed again and again, green sparks tearing through the dark. Halbrecht drove him backward toward the edge of the platform, nearly taking his throat with a low rotational sweep. Ciel bent away, coat snapping in the air, then came back with a vicious upward strike that split Halbrecht's sleeve and drew the first line of spectral blood. The senior examiner's expression shifted. At last. Somewhere between surprise and anger. You should have remained useful, Halbrecht hissed. Ciel's answer was ice. I outgrew that. He attacked harder. The duel stopped resembling procedure and became something more brutal, two different versions of death trying to erase each other. One obedient. One chosen. Halbrecht drove his blade into Ciel's side. Pain exploded through him. Cold, deep, unbearable. He staggered, but not far enough. Ciel caught Halbrecht's wrist, forced the weapon deeper into himself to close the distance, and slammed the butt of his own scythe across Halbrecht's jaw with enough force to send him reeling. For one suspended instant, both of them stood bleeding. Then another presence entered the chamber. Slow applause. The unknown Reaper stepped from the shadows beyond the platform. Messy, he said. But educational. Halbrecht turned first. You, he said, unreal hatred entered his voice. The unknown Reaper smiled faintly. Yes. Me. Strange how sealed histories keep opening. Ciel breathed hard, one hand pressed against the wound in his side. What are you? He demanded. The Reaper looked at him. The part of the system they cut away, he said. A correction that learned to think for itself. Halbrecht raised his scythe. You should have stayed buried. And you should have died before becoming an administrator. Then everything happened at once. Halbrecht attacked the unknown Reaper. The unknown Reaper vanished, reappeared, and drove a hand of green-black force through Halbrecht's chest. Not killing him, but pinning him in place with writhing threads of his own corrupted record. The records above the chamber began spinning faster. Too fast. The archive was destabilizing. Ciel understood immediately. All those sealed truths, all those buried alterations, all that pressure held beneath official order. Breaking. If the chamber collapsed, the records would either burn or surge back into the system at once. Either outcome would destroy the dispatch beyond recovery. Halbrecht looked up through clenched teeth. Stop this. The unknown Reaper laughed. No. Ciel stared at the chaos overhead. Then at Halbrecht. Then at the sealed archive of his life. This was the moment. The truth was here. Close enough to touch. And yet if he reached for it selfishly now, everything else would be swallowed with it. He hated the realization the moment it formed. But hated was not the same as refusing. He turned to the unknown Reaper. If the archive falls, does the estate record survive? A pause. Then, no. And if the system survives intact? It gets buried again. Ciel almost smiled. So those are the choices. His gaze lifted to the rotating records above. Then, slowly, he understood the only answer left. He could not keep the truth and keep himself. He could, however, make sure the lie died with him. There was a stabilizing core beneath the platform. The old heart of the archive, where sealed records were anchored to the broader system. Destroy it correctly, and the chamber would purge upward, forcing every buried file back into active record before collapse. It would also annihilate anyone bound to the core when it ruptured. A final extraction. No return. His instructor had once told him that grief was not permission. Now Ciel understood something else. Purpose was. He looked at Halbrecht. At the unknown Reaper. At the sealed bones of the system around them. Then he drove the blade of his scythe into the platform. Deep. Past stone. Into the anchor. The chamber screamed. Halbrecht's eyes widened. What have you done? Ciel's voice did not shake. What you should have done years ago. The unknown Reaper stared at him, and for the first time all his irony vanished. You'll die. Ciel's green eyes lifted, bright and terrible. I was supposed to die in the fire. The core ruptured. Records exploded upward in spirals of green-white light. Names, crimes, concealed histories, altered endings, all of it surged into the system at once like blood forced back into a dead heart. Halbrecht screamed as the truth he had buried tore through him. The unknown Reaper tried to move toward Ciel, but the collapsing anchor held them all in place. The stone cracked beneath Ciel's boots. Pain flooded every part of him. More than when he had first become a Reaper. More than the wound in his side. This was unmaking. His hands tightened around the shaft of his scythe. Around him, the world of death began to rewrite itself. And for the first time since childhood, Ciel Phantomhive felt something like peace. Not happiness. Never that. But completion. He had found the truth. He had forced it into the light. And in the end, he had chosen the manner of his own ending. Not prey. Not victim. Not a file corrected by someone else's convenience. Chosen. The last thing he saw was green light swallowing the chamber whole. The last thing he heard was the sound of bells ringing all across the dispatch, not in order, but in alarm. And the last thing he thought was simple. Now you will remember me correctly. When the light faded, the sealed archive was gone. So was Halbrecht. So was the unknown Reaper. And at the center of the ruin, where the platform had shattered around the dead heart of the chamber, only one thing remained. A broken scythe. The records that rose from the collapse spread through every hall, every ledger, every court of death. Seals failed. Buried cases reopened. Concealed alterations surfaced. The Phantomhive estate incident returned to official history, no longer corrected, no longer survivable, no longer clean. And with it came one final notation added by the system itself. Not by a clerk, not by an examiner, not by a coward pretending order was the same as truth. A final record. Ciel Phantomhive. Status. Deceased. Cause, voluntary rupture of sealed archive core. Disposition, unclassifiable. In the cycles that followed, Reapers stopped speaking his name carelessly. Some called him reckless. Some called him corrupted. Some, very quietly, called him the only honest ending the dispatch had produced in centuries. But none of them forgot him. Because the boy who should have died in the ashes of his estate had done something far worse than survive. He had forced death itself to tell the truth. And then he had died making sure it stayed told. That was the end of Ciel Phantomhive. Not as a child. Not as a victim. Not even as a grim reaper. But as the one ending the system could never fully bury again.